A boy is nailed to a wooden post, soaked in pitch, and set on fire to light a garden party. Down the path, more human torches flicker against the dark. And the host of this party, strolling among the burning bodies in the costume of a chariot racer, is the Emperor of Rome. That happened. That is real history. And here is the part that should bother you. It has almost nothing to do with the crime everyone thinks he committed. You can picture the other version. The tyrant on a rooftop, smiling, playing music while his city dies in flames beneath him. It is one of the most famous images in all of history, and it is a lie, almost top to bottom. He wasn't on that rooftop. The instrument wasn't in his hands. He wasn't even in the city. The man we remember as the monster who burned Rome was framed. He just happened to be guilty of something else entirely, and far worse. It starts in the dark, in July, in the cheap part of town. The shops crammed against the great Chariot Stadium are full of oil and cloth in timber, everything a fire loves. It is hot, it is dry, a spark catches, and within an hour there is no stopping it. Rome is not the city of marble you imagine. Most of it is a maze of wooden tenements stacked 5 and 6 stories high, packed so tight you could pass bread between windows across the street. It is, in plain terms, kindling with people inside. The fire does not spread, it hunts. It climbs the hills, jumps the gaps, doubles back on the crowds trying to flee. People are crushed in the narrow lanes. For 6 days it burns out of control. Then it seems to die and roars back to life for 3 more. When the ash finally cools, 10 of Rome's 14 districts are damaged or gone. 3 are erased to bare ground. The greatest city on earth is a smoking ruin, and hundreds of thousands of citizens have nowhere left to sleep. Now, where was the emperor while his capital burned? Not on a rooftop, not in Rome at all. Nero was at Antium, modern Anzio, on the coast, the town where he was born, about 35 miles down the road when the fire broke out. This is not a guess. The source is Tacitus, a Roman historian who openly despised Nero, who had every reason to make him look as bad as possible, and who still wrote that the emperor was out of town when it began. The hostile witness gives him an alibi. Think about what that does to the picture. The single most famous detail in his entire story, Nero fiddling while Rome burns, is physically impossible. He couldn't watch the city die from a balcony because he was a hard day's travel away. And the fiddle? It didn't exist either. The violin would not be invented for another 1,500 years. There was no instrument in his hands because there was no such instrument anywhere on earth. The most repeated fact about Nero is wrong in 2 different ways at once. Wrong about where he was, and wrong about what he held. The rooftop performance is pure invention, layered on top of an older rumor that he sang about the fall of Troy while watching the flames. And even that, Tacitus reports as gossip. The thing people were saying, not the thing that happened. Keep that word in mind. Rumor. Because rumor is about to do something history rarely allows. It's about to beat the truth and hold the win for 2,000 years. So what did Nero actually do when the news reached him? That's where it gets interesting. He raced back to a burning city. And then he did the things you would want a leader to do. He threw open his own private gardens to people who had lost everything. He opened the public buildings, opened the Field of Mars, let the homeless camp on the imperial lawns. He brought in food from the surrounding towns and slashed the price of grain so the survivors could eat. He organized crews to fight the flames and clear the dead. Even Tacitus, the man who hated him, admits all of it happened. The hostile witness confirms the rescue, and after the fire, Nero rewrote the city itself. Wider streets, height limits on buildings, stone instead of timber on the lower floors, fire breaks between structures, water access required in every neighborhood. He built a Rome designed to survive the next fire. By the cold arithmetic of governance, it was a model of crisis response. So why does nobody remember any of that? Why do we remember the rooftop instead? Two reasons. He gave his enemies an opening, and then he did something genuinely unforgivable. Start with the opening, the inconvenient truth that keeps the suspicion alive to this day. Nero benefited from the fire. A huge stretch of the burned-out center, the most valuable land in the most crowded city on earth, was suddenly empty, and Nero took a giant piece of it for himself. On that scorched ground, he began building the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a pleasure palace so vast it swallowed the heart of the city. Picture it, an artificial lake where a neighborhood used to stand, vineyards and woods with wild animals roaming inside the walls, ceilings of ivory that slid open to rain perfume and flower petals down on his dinner guests, a dining room that turned, and out front a bronze statue of Nero himself, 100 feet tall. To the people packed back into the surviving slums, watching their emperor raise a private paradise on the graves of their homes, the message was obscene. The city burns, and he builds himself this. You can see how the rumor wrote itself. You can see why people started whispering that maybe the fire wasn't an accident at all. Maybe he wanted the land cleared. He had no real motive. It destroyed his own palace and decades of art he loved. Fires were constant in Rome. This one most likely caught the wind, the way dozens of smaller ones did. He didn't start it, but he feasted on its ashes. And that made him look guilty enough that he knew it. So he did what cornered men with power always do. He found someone else to burn. There was a small, strange new sect in Rome. Secretive. They met in private. They spoke of eating the body and drinking the blood of their god. They refused to honor the Roman gods, which to a Roman wasn't a matter of faith, it was treason against the state. They were already distrusted, already suspected. They were perfect, the Christians. Nero blamed the fire on them, and the punishment he invented was so grotesque it disturbed even Romans who had no love for the sect. Tacitus describes it plainly. Some were sewn into the skins of animals and torn apart by dogs in the arena. Some were crucified. And some, this is the garden party from the start of this story, were coated in pitch, tied to posts in Nero's own gardens, the same gardens he had opened to refugees, and set alight to light his evening like human lamps. This is the real crime, not arson, persecution. This was Rome's first organized campaign against Christians, the first in history. And its cruelty was so extreme that even Tacitus, who had no love for Christians and none for Nero, wrote that the people of Rome began to pity the victims. Sit with that. The emperor managed something almost impossible. He made a Roman mob feel sorry for a group it had despised. That is what history should remember Nero for. Everything that came after, centuries of persecution, traces back to one emperor who needed a fire to not be his fault. The man framed for arson became an arsonist of a far darker kind. So how did the small lie beat the enormous truth? To answer that, follow the people who wrote it down. Here is the thing the cartoon never tells you. The common people of Rome actually liked Nero. He gave them games. He gave them spectacle. He kept the grain cheap. For years after his death, ordinary Romans left flowers on his grave. Some refused to believe he was dead at all. But the men who wrote the histories were not the crowd. They were the senators, the aristocrats, the educated elite, and they hated him with a white-hot passion. He humiliated their class. He performed on stage as a singer and an actor, which to a Roman noble was a disgrace beyond words. Like the emperor begging for coins in the street. He taxed the rich. He executed senators he suspected of plotting. And so when those same men sat down to record the fire, they did not write the version where the emperor opened his gardens to the homeless. They wrote the version where the monster sang while the world burned. The rooftop slander wasn't reporting, it was revenge, set in ink. They couldn't beat him while he lived, So they assassinated his memory after he died and handed the cartoon to everyone who came after. So strip it all back. Take the music out of his hands. Take him off the rooftop. Put him 35 miles down the coast, then racing home to open his gardens and feed the starving. That man is not the monster of the legend. But don't let him go, because the same gardens he opened to save the living, he later filled with the burning bodies of the innocent. He didn't burn Rome, he burned people to save himself. And that is the lesson buried in the ashes. The cartoon villain with the fiddle is almost comforting. The real Nero is something colder and more familiar. A vain, frightened man with absolute power, who was decent at noon and monstrous by nightfall, and who, when the world turned against him, reached for the weakest people he could find and set them on fire to save his own name. Strip away the legend, and you don't get an innocent man. You get a worse one. History gave him the wrong crime. The real one was darker. And we are still repeating his enemy's revenge every time we say someone fiddled while Rome burned. A phrase about a man who wasn't there, holding an instrument that didn't exist. The senators who buried Nero in lies didn't stop with him. Some of Rome's most famous monsters were built the same way, by the enemies who outlived them. And some of its so-called heroes were the real villains, polished clean by the winners. Next time we pull apart another one and find out who actually deserves the name. Subscribe to Empire Archives and keep questioning the story you were handed.